we could easily be in the Nets position of seeing a roster that has no versatility whatsoever, seeing a roster in which has no direction whatsoever. We could be in this situation right now. A lot of people advocated for it rather early on in time with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum said, oh, man, this team with Tatum and Brown, they can't play together, right? We should split them up. The East is too hard with KD, Kyrie, and James Harden on the Nets, right? And today, it's a different story. It's a completely different story between the two franchises. And despite me only showing 2 plays, we saw the disengagement of the Nets. We saw they're packing it in before All-Star break with a terrible record. They have a terrible record on the season. There's nothing to play for. There's nothing to lose for, rather, in terms of draft pick right now for the Nets. And there's no effort going into All-Star break. There's no particular direction at all. And it took 2 plays to see that. And you see the versatility on the roster. It just simply does not match up to the Celtics whatsoever. And this is where patience comes into play so much for a franchise, because if the Nets, they're simply patient back in 2019 with D'Angelo Russell and everyone on that roster, this result wouldn't have played out today as it did. Yet we see the 2 squads on court the last 2 games. They're miles and miles apart. Franco?
Yeah. That was time traveling back with the D'Angelo Russell roster in 2019, 5 years. You can even travel back 10 years on their impatience. And when they assembled the team that assembled what we are today with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum getting Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett out of here, and what they thought was the premium squad in what when I was a kid I thought was the squad to beat: Darren Williams, Joe Johnson, Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Brooke Lopez. And I mean, look at where the Celtics are now because of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy how far it's come. And I was talking about that yesterday. I was like, the rivalry between the Celtics and the Nets felt so grand for the last 5 years or so. It was always going to be that thing where it's like, oh, we fleeced the Nets out of that trade to get Tatum and Brown, but the Nets were showing signs of becoming a legitimate title contender. And it would have been a little awkward if, with no picks, they were able to win a championship before the Celtics. So I don't know. I'm kind of happy that they were impatient. And honestly, it's kind of nice to see, because Celtics are 11-1 since 11-1 versus the Nets since the playoffs in 2022.
That's absolutely insanity to think about, because at that point in time, I remember during that series, Evan Fournier wearing number 94 for the Celtics, and I just remember during that series thinking, how did we get here? How did we get here? Because Ian said it perfectly, saying awkward. That is the exact word to use. It would have been awkward if the Brooklyn Nets win the title, specifically in 2021, because it looked like they were well on their way before Kyrie, James Harden, both of them go down in the playoffs. The Milwaukee Bucks eliminate them in the second round, the Brooklyn Nets in the second round, that is, in the semifinals. They looked well on their way, the Brooklyn Nets did, and at that point in time, if they would have walked away with the title, that would have been devastating to the Celtics' morale. Now, not saying that Tatum and Brown specifically on the roster would have been devastated, but certainly the Celtics fan base, which, geez, that would have killed the history of the KG Paul Pierce trade, in which we'd celebrated for essentially an entire decade after it happened. They would have completely killed the narrative of that entire story, and the Celtics' history would have been tainted in some way. And yet today, the Brooklyn Nets, they fail. KD, Kyrie, James Harden, all on different rosters. We're beating the Nets by 50 and 11-1 since that moment in which Kyrie stepped on the logo, the Celtics logo. And that was a moment in which we're looking at the Celtics roster and the Nets roster going, oh my goodness, we're going to have to deal with this for 4 or 5 years. We're going to have to deal with this gauntlet Nets team for 4 or 5 years while we somehow have to figure it out with Brown and Tatum and Fournier and Tristan Thompson and Kemba Walker and Robert Williams and Marcus Smart. We're going to have to somehow figure it out with these players, while the Brooklyn Nets, they're just a completely stacked roster. And instead, 2024, the Brooklyn Nets, completely obsolete in the Eastern Conference. I mean, if they make the play-in, it's not even going to matter. They're out of the play-in right now, while the Celtics hold the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. I'm sure there will be a day in time in which the Nets become better than the Celtics again, because this is just how NBA history works. But it's not tonight. It's not today. It's not this era whatsoever. And the Brown and Tatum era is very much alive, while the Nets, the Mikal Bridges era and the Cam Johnson era and the Ben Simmons era, it's going.
It's something.
It's
something.
It's going. What's up, guys? If you like that clip, you can watch more of us right here, or you can join us live right after every single Celtics game on the Celtics Talk Weekly postgame show.